questions. Today's question is, what is wealth and how do people, individuals, households, firms, whole nations actually get wealthy? And then furthermore, why should we care about what the government does? How do government actions make us more or less wealthy? Now, if you live in the African continent, you probably you might live in an autocratic country, a country with a very closed government. You can't necessarily access what the government is doing. The functionaries, the people who work in the government are inaccessible to you. In some parts of Africa, the government is a bit more accessible, but in all, right, the continent is pretty poor. And so the reason this question is important is to at least shed light on the relationship between our own personal success and government action in a way that is that can actually enlighten our own actions and in a way that can spark conversations that can serve that purpose. If you live in Kenya, well, the latest iteration, the latest budget is going to be read in just about a month. And it might be a good idea to learn a little bit more about what the lives, the quality of lives we live is related to what the government does. And not just for this round of the budget, but forever. So the answer to the question how households, how people get rich is, I'm going to lay it down immediately. We get rich through teamwork, through working together. And the bigger the ambition, the bigger the goal I have, the more knowledge I'm going to need to achieve that goal, and the more collaboration I'm going to need from people. Right? That's the simple answer. Now, what the government's role in my getting wealthy is creating an environment that is favorable to cooperation and disincentivizes a certain kind of competition, right? The negative competition, the kind of competition where I open a restaurant, you open a restaurant, and I throw a grenade at your restaurant in order to make sure that you and your restaurant are not successful. So that's the answer. Now let's get into it. What is wealth? Adam Smith is regarded as the father of modern economics. Wealth is defined by Adam Smith as the annual produce of the land and labor of the society. This produce satisfies human needs and wants. Wealth is also understood as the value of assets under one's control. Assets can themselves be defined as objects of subjective utility, which means that whatever it is I think is valuable to me, I could consider an asset. Now, an asset can be understood as any object that offers utility to a person. In addition to embodying a quantum of value, an asset has a degree of convertibility that contributes to its desirability. So how is wealth dependent on and defined by relationships? The control of things of value includes rights of ownership and the rights of allocation of those things. A An individual is free to allocate property as they wish. These freedoms are limited by a social agreement that manifests in a state. The state is itself restricted so that it cannot exercise arbitrary control over the rights and freedoms of the individual. Put together, allocative actions constitute claims on property and non-physical entitlements and obligations that are checked by the network of social relationships. This is to say that freedom, the ability to do whatever one wants at any time and however one wants, is enhanced, maintained, and limited by our relationships with others. Our relationships create the fence around which our wealth is kept safe. Our relationships also generate the wealth that we enjoy. How does the collapse of government explain relationships and wealth? Although wealth is imagined in a sense that is detached from social life, the disintegration of the state quickly reveals that a combination of incentives of coercion, rationality, tradition, and shared higher order goals are important enablers of the generation and safeguarding of wealth. Wealth is generated in a productive relationship, and claims to its ownership and allocation can be made through theft, violence, charismatic appeal, or appeals to reason. Finally, relationships create boundaries to our actions. Absolute freedom is bounded by the need to collaborate and cooperate with others. So, how does government, or how can government, make you poorer? Because policy is paid for through revenues raised through taxation, policy involves a claim on your private property. A public that remains unconcerned with the workings of its government will soon find itself impoverished. This is because there are some enterprising individuals called politicians that are incentivized to make ever escalating claims on your private property and will continue to do so unless they are checked by the public. That is, checked by you. How does the division of labor generate wealth? Why don't you build a table on your own? Now, Adam Smith states that the extent of the market is dependent on the extent of the division of labor. The extent of the division of labor is a phrase that describes how disaggregated a production process is in terms of the number of tasks assigned to a person, the number of tasks there are, and what this means for the amount of wealth that is enjoyed by those participating in the process. In every process, there are raw materials that are gathered together, organized, and transformed from one state into a desired state. For example, to make a table, trees are cut down and transformed into lumber, which is then transformed once again into a table. This process involves a lumberjack who cuts down the trees and turns them into lumber, and carpenters who turn the lumber into tables. Furthermore, the process may also involve lorry drivers who transport the lumber from the forest into the warehouse where it is stored until it is transformed into a table by a carpenter. If one gets even deeper into the weeds, there are manufacturers of nails and other inputs that will help hold the table together. If one person had to cut down the trees, turn them into lumber, carry them to a warehouse, turn them, and then produce tables and chairs out of them alone, making tables would be a tedious process, right? Carpentry wouldn't be attractive. In fact, all other activities in general would not be as attractive. You couldn't do them to that the degree, to that high degree. Furthermore, if the carpenter had to build his own chainsaws, tough clothes with which to engage in lumberjacking, trucks to carry the lumber, and then tools to transform the lumber into wood and then into tables and chairs, the whole enterprise would be excessively tedious. In fact, the carpenter would resort to building simple, poorly made tables and chairs on which to sit on, simple, poorly made clothes to wear, simple, poorly made tools, simple, poorly made wheelbarrows, etc., etc., with which to complete the process of production. This was the very predicament faced by prehistoric man when, say, 35,000 years ago, he engaged in the enterprise of growing his wealth. Today, due to the process of the division of labor, which leads to specialization, individuals can consume and enjoy the wealth that others produce. Now, wealth, human ambition, and teamwork. Finally, human beings are different from any other being in nature because they can imagine complex things and come together and build those things. Furthermore, because the most complex things, that is, the things that require a lot more transformation than a simple table, cannot be built alone. Human beings have an incentive to subordinate their aims to the singular objective of building something complex together. This is a direct repudiation of a certain notion promoted by say, political scientists, for example, at least some of them, that man has only his self-interest to drive him forward. In reality, man is driven to join others to build something bigger together. The division of labor is driven by shared ambition. The greater the ambition, the greater the number of people that must share in that ambition in order that it be actualized. In a sense, taking the utility of the ambition for granted, the scale and complexity of the ambition is directly correlated with the number of people that must choose to come together to meet that objective. Ambition here can also be considered as a stand-in for wealth, with scale and complexity of ambition correlating with the scale and, say, the depth of wealth generated. Put together, this implies that an individual becomes wealthy when they optimize resources that they will deploy in a productive process, including by engaging in the division of labor, deepening and widening their level of expertise both at the individual and the group level through sustained engagement with a wide range of difficult tasks to a deep degree of knowledge. In other words, one gets rich by working with others, and one enjoys wealth by consuming the work of others who also work with others. Specialization is an important step towards wealth generation. Now, when one works with others towards highly ambitious ends, productivity and efficiency are improved. In his seminal work, The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith stated that wealth is the annual produce of the land and the labor of the society. Again, produce is defined as the good or service that satisfies human needs and wants. That is, there are activities that man finds are of utility for him and that he is willing to pay for. Demand and supply. How do you get rich? Because of teamwork and the work of others. If a woman has an interest in certain things and she is able to make a legitimate claim for, say, that thing, that is, if she can afford to obtain the thing through the legitimized means of purchase, if she can buy the thing, then that thing is valuable to the woman and she has generated demand for it. If someone or a group of people have an interest and an ability to produce that thing that the woman wants, the group constitutes an entrepreneur, a firm, or a group of firms that can generate supply for that thing. In other words, wealth is generated where supply meets demand, where producers can effectively produce what consumers can effectively ask for, and producers optimize their resources and manpower through the division of labor and specialization, and are therefore efficient and productive. The division of labor and specialization allow for products that could not be produced without collaboration of vast networks of highly knowledgeable people. iPhones, Gucci bags, luxury sedans, and flat-screen television that have become such a feature of modern life were unavailable to kings of old. Furthermore, whereas in the recent past, products like flat-screen televisions were available to the wealthiest at very high costs, these same devices are available to the poorest among us at much lower costs. This means that people have become wealthy, or rather that people become wealthy when they work with others to do hard things and solve hard problems for people who regard these problems as of the highest importance. Furthermore, this means that people also get wealthier because other smart people are willing to work together to solve very difficult problems. If I buy a Swiss watch, I'm benefiting because I'm able to buy something that I could not have made and that other people, other very, very smart people came together and made to my benefit. Now, people work on our behalf even as we seemingly do nothing. Because of their hard work, we can purchase flat screen televisions for cheap. Now, of course, we're not really doing nothing because all of us are doing something and all the things that we do benefit each other. Now, because of the hard work that others do and the sweat that others generate, we become wealthier even as we do nothing. The government's only job, therefore, is to do the things that keep people working together voluntarily while refraining from doing things that pull people away from each other, leave them less productive and efficient, and make it difficult for them to come together. And then also taking away all that they've earned through taxation, whose revenues and then expenditures remain unexplained and or unjustified. Your wealth is tied to the stability of your society, teamwork, and the amount of specialized in-demand knowledge that you possess. Getting rich at the expense of others. If stealing is immoral, unwarranted claims on your wealth by the state is also immoral. One can take actions that, by design and by consequence, accumulate agency towards themselves while ensuring that the chances that others can accumulate agency are encumbered. This means that it is possible, and it does happen, that some people make themselves wealthy at the expense of others and erect obstacles for others to stop them or to attain the same levels of wealth. For example, the chemical factory that dumps waste in the river and pays bribes to the regulator sent by the government gets rich, destroys the livelihoods of others, and removes any instruments that others can use to stop them. One might say that many systems of virtuous thought and virtuous action understood this proclivity in man and preached against uh, and organize against it, and rightly so. We are rich because we can enjoy the division of labor of others. Thank you.